Hi, welcome to Volume 12 of the Woodsmaster series, where we teach you to be the Woodsmaster. In this volume of the Woodsmaster, we're going to be taking a departure from our standard fare. That's because this video is going to be vehicle biased. Why are we doing that? Well, it's because in about 80% of the survival situations, the person is in that situation because their vehicle became stuck or disabled. The joke around here is a 4x4 vehicle is the best way to get as far back as you possibly can before you break down or get stuck. The point is that the best way to survive a situation is by driving out. Well, I guess you get the idea. In this video, we're going to be discussing some of the basic vehicle recovery techniques. We're going to be talking about field expedient repairs, how to get you back on the road and get you out of that ditch that you might have got yourself into. And a lot of neat little things like that. I want to tell you something, though, that you probably already know. There's no way that I can ever give you all of the information you need about vehicle recovery and all the tricks for this and that you might find out there. I'm going to show you some of the basic things that you're going to learn to elaborate on your own. The main idea is to make it so you can drive out if you find yourself in an emergency situation. In other words, make it so it isn't an emergency. Might cost you a few bucks when you get back for repairs on your car, but it'll get you home. Now, before we get into those techniques, I want to kind of introduce a little piece that we made about 20 years ago. Actually, we didn't make it for public viewing. It was an incident that happened when I was building a bomb shelter. Let's take a look. You know, every time I look at that video, I wonder how I made it through those days. I sure didn't know what I was doing with the winch, but I was a heck of a climber. You see, I made 4 major mistakes when I put that rig together. The first one I did is I used climbing rope, an old climbing rope. Now that rope is 12,000 pounds test strength per strand. And I gave it 4 strands, which gives it about 48,000 pounds of strength. That ought to be plenty to pull a little 8,000 pound pipe around. I forgot one little thing. Climbing rope has elasticity, so it acts like a rubber band, and it can kind of shoot things through the air, and it did. Another thing I did, continuing with that climbing theme, is I used carabiners to attach the ropes to the chain. So this little carabiner here is good for about 4,000 pounds of strength, but see, that's when it's pulled straight down like that. This wasn't like that. It was a constant pull of around 6,000 pounds, and it was being twisted. So that tore it apart pretty badly. And then there was another thing that I did. You see, I forgot to put a little damper on the device, something to keep it from flying back at me. You know, I should have put a blanket on it or maybe a rug or something like that to keep it from flying back in my face. Oh, there was something else I did. This is the actual winch that I used back then. And if you look at this winch right in here, why this little hook here is bent out. The gate no longer closes. I failed, however, to read the side of the winch that tells the power of this winch. And it says right on here 1,750 pounds, and I was pulling 8,000. Not too bright, Ron. Is there anything good? Yep, one thing. A helmet. When I was putting that rig together, I did notice that it looked a little shaky, so I put on a helmet just to protect myself, and it's a good thing I did, because that thing came winging back, whacked me in the helmet here, and knocked me right down on the ground. If I hadn't had this helmet, I wouldn't be here today. So you've got to watch these things, because they'll take your life, or they'll take your head, or they'll take your teeth, and they don't care. This is the basic recovery system that I've built up over the years, or actually I've broken it down into these components. You can always add to what I carry, but these are what I carry when I go out into the mountains or the desert. Let me show you what I've got in here. I've got an ammo box, of course, and that holds the metal stuff. This piece here is called a D-ring and a clevis pin. And this pin just pops right out, so I can use this to connect things like the snatch cable, which you're going to see in a minute, and the chain, or other things. Right to this. It's a good sturdy piece. This one here is about 6 ton. Attached to that is a little short piece of, well, I guess it's just a strap. I call this my winch strap. And I use this whenever I'm pulling chain, if I'm pulling it through mud or dirt or whatever. I also use it for pulling out my winch. Sometimes I'll just hook it on the end of the hook, and I'll drag on this instead of trying to grab that hard hook and pull it out. It keeps me from getting cut and a lot of other stuff. Just a handy little thing to have. It's got a loop on both ends, 1-inch tubular webbing. Another thing that's in here is my chain. And I carry about 20 or 25 feet of chain. I don't know how many feet, but it's plenty. And it's tow chain. Chain does not stretch when you pull. It's just chain. And make sure you get good, strong welded links with a hook about like you see here. You'll see more of that in just a minute. But I keep that stuff in an ammo can so it's out of the way. It's heavy. Another thing that I carry is a piece of snatch. Some people call it snatch cable. It's a snatch strap is really what it is. And it's about 2 inches in diameter, and I think this is tested out around 30,000 pounds. And this one here is about 25 feet. Now, snatch straps like this, they do stretch. They stretch somewhat, and they're good because if you hook it vehicle to vehicle, when you start to tow something, it jerks it out like a rubber band on the end of a, well, it looks like it's like 2 cars hooked by a rubber band. Boing, pops it right out of the ground. Anyway, this is a good way to pull things out. It's also nice around trees, although it does stretch a little bit. It does work around trees. It doesn't cut into the bark of a tree like a chain will. And this is a really important piece of gear. Another thing that I carry with me is a pair of gloves. Whenever you're handling a winch cable, you're going to need something to protect your hands, because a lot of times the cable will fray, and those little frays will stick right through your hand. They hurt like heck. And of course they're dirty, so you can get an infection real easily. Make sure you've got leather palmed gloves at the very least. Make sure that they're fairly tight so you can manipulate things if you want to when your hands get cold. And that's one of the problems. Sometimes when you get stuck, it's in cold weather and everything is icy cold. This protects your hands, and you've got to protect your hands. I also carry a shovel. Now, this is just a little cold steel shovel here, but I also keep an entrenching tool, which is a military folding shovel, in the vehicle. And of course these are for digging holes, as you know. But the nice thing about this is you can sharpen the edges of it and use it a little bit like an axe, so you can chop with it if you have to. It's not intended to be used for a lot of chopping, but it can certainly get branches and things like that out of your way. So you're going to need a shovel. Always make sure you have one of those. Another thing I keep with me is a copy of David Alloway's Desert Survival Skills book. Now, if you're going to get one book about desert survival or about survival, period, this would probably be the one that I'd suggest that you get. There's a couple good ones out there, actually, but this one is the best for the desert that I've seen. David is a highly innovative and very skilled wilderness survival instructor, and a lot of his skill and information is in here, including information about vehicle recovery and winching and so forth. So get a copy of that book, keep it with you, and then you have something to read when you run into trouble. Another thing is a little piece of plywood. This is 3/4 inch plywood, and this is for underneath that high lift jack. This gives it a good wide base, so when I'm lifting something heavy, it doesn't drive the base of the jack down into the sand, dirt, or mud. This gives it that kind of a foundation. You could use it for other things as well. You could lay two parts out if you're working on your vehicle. It keeps them clean and so forth. But it's a nice thing to have in there. Another thing I keep in there is a little crowbar. Now, you can carry a bigger crowbar if you want. This is as small as I found to be practical, but if you happen to dent a fender and it's hitting your wheel, this is usable. You could pull that fender out so you could drive again. I've known of people who went out into the woods and dented their fender so badly it came down and touched the wheel, and they didn't want to drive, so they decided to walk out because they had a fender bumping against their tire. Well, that's silly. Just take something like this and peel that baby back out. Then let the insurance company pay for the dent. Anyway, this thing here can save you a lot of aggravation, and if you do get something messed up in your car, you need to lever something, that's what you need. The last thing is probably the cheapest thing of all, and when you start out, this is where you start out. These are 2 pieces of carpet. They're about 1.5 feet wide and about 6 feet long, and just get the cheapest remnants you can possibly find. This is just standard flooring that you might find in department store or someplace like that. It's a really tough commercial carpet, and what this is used for is sand mats. You lay it down in the sand if you get stuck, and you drive up onto it. You just back right out of holes with things like this under there. If you want to work on your car and you don't want to lay in the mud or the dirt, you can stretch this out under your car and use it as a mat to protect you from the dirt and grime and mud and so forth underneath you. It's also usable when you're winching. You'll see this a lot here. This flops over the top of your winch cable so the cable doesn't snap back into your face. This acts like a damper and holds that cable down and slows it down anyway before it whacks you in the mug. So this is an important thing, and I carry 2 pieces. So you can see that's pretty compact. That doesn't take up a lot of space, lays flat in the trunk of your car. In fact, this whole kit doesn't take up very much space. But if you don't have it, you're going to miss it. If you do have it, you're going to be, well, you'll be thanking this video.
It may look different.
Yeah, rock or that.
Anybody want to put any bets on this?
No. Got your case of beer, don't worry. It's too close. Keep that away from the gas tank. Yeah. Okay. You got a good?
Now let's take a look at the 2 most common pieces of off-road recovery gear, the high lift jack and the winch. This baby here is the high lift jack. These are really versatile tools because it could be used in a lot of different ways. For instance, this could be used as a clamp to squeeze things together, as a winch to pull things together, and of course as a jack to lift things. They could even be used in emergencies for spreading doors and things like that. They're a very, very versatile tool, and if you're going to pick one tool for off-roading, this would be the one that I'd suggest you get because of its versatility. Now if you have a 4-wheel drive vehicle like this one here, you're probably going to want to lift it quite a ways before you get yourself out of trouble. And this thing can do it. This particular jack is a 48-incher, and that's a 4-footer to here, and it comes in a 54-inch length as well. But if you find yourself high-centered, by that I mean you've got a log or something like that up underneath your transmission or differential and your wheels aren't grabbing, this thing can lift you up so you could dig that thing out, or put something under the tires so you're high enough that you could drive away. It can also get you out of holes. But this is the tool. So if you get just one, get this baby here. Let's see how it works. The high lift jack includes a couple of accessories, and this one here is called a bumper hook. And this is for those rounded fancy bumpers that you find on cars nowadays. Well, I don't actually need this for this vehicle, so we'll just take it off. There's a little bolt here that comes right off. Incidentally, this little hook here, we'll be using that a little bit later to keep a cable on this when we're using this as a winch. So we'll just remove that, actually, so we don't lose anything. Put the bolt back inside, so that way it won't get away from you. You don't want to lose it in the dirt. And that frees up the jack. Now, before we start jacking this thing, we're going to put that piece of wood down. Now, as with any vehicle, if you get it up in the air, what you don't want to do is be under it, because sometimes jacks do fail. It could fall and it could crush you. So we're going to set this about where we want it to be and start operating the jack handle. Now you can see that the lifting item there is starting to move upwards. So, now you notice something else? And this is typical of a jack. You see how it wants to slide out? Whenever there's forces in a jack, the forces are going to try to push that jack out. So you've got to be careful of it. What this is telling me is this particular location is not good. If I get this vehicle up in the air on there, it could slide right off. So let's move it to a place where it's going to work properly. This little lever here controls whether the jack is actually lifting or it's allowing something to go back down. When it's in the up position, it's lifting, and when you hammer it down like that, it's letting it back down. So we've repositioned the jack in another more secure place on the vehicle, and let's start lifting. Now, when you're working with one of these, you're going to hear two snapping sounds. There's two big pins that move when you work it. It doesn't allow you to continue to jack until you hear that second pin hit. In other words, when you lift the thing up, hear that little click? That means it's ready for the next pressure stroke. And now it's up. Now when you want it down, push down on the descent lever, and it's the reverse. You're actually going to jack it down. Up, boop, to your click. You're always going to hear two clicks. You probably hear a lot of squeaking right now, but she's coming down. And there you are. Now, something about the high lift jack. This thing here is the only thing that can really lift a vehicle this size, and it can lift something out of a hole. If you've got the vehicle stuck in a deep hole and you've got a long ways to the ground, a standard jack isn't going to get you up. Even hydraulic floor jacks won't get you up. But with a 4-foot lift on this thing here, you can use it to get you up high enough to put objects under your tires or to help you to clear things that you might have run to on the trail. But this little guy here is a critical piece of desert driving gear. You should always have one of these, and if you don't have a winch, get this first. The best way to attach both ends of your winching strap together, in fact any piece of chain or anything else, is to use a D-ring and a clevis pin. This is the D-ring here. Let me show you how it works. What I'll do is I'll pass it through the strap, one of the loops, pass the other end through one of the loops, like so. Now, that connects those two pieces. Now, in order to connect to the top of the jack here, I want to connect right here to use this as a winch. I'll simply slip this on like so, drop the pin through, turn it over, and tighten on the nut. I happen to have a little cotter key here. That'll help it to stay on there. I don't want to bend it in place or anything, but that'll help to keep that assembly together. So that attaches the top of the jack to an anchor point which is tied to a tree. Now I always use a strap and not a chain when you go into a tree, because straps will not injure the bark on the tree, or at least not as much as a chain would. So now we're going to take that bumper lift assembly that I showed you before, and we're going to reattach it to the base of the high lift jack. A couple little holes in here. You'll have to figure out which one you want to use. Now, the only thing that's really important about this is you'll notice here there's a little hook, and that's facing in towards the body of the jack. That's there to keep what we're going to use now to pull the vehicle from falling off this little bar. Now, in different vehicles, there's different kinds of ways of attaching your tow devices. This one has like a D-ring hooked onto it, and some of them just have tow hooks. But that's what we're going to attach our chain to. I'm just going to drop that down inside like this. In case you haven't ever seen a tow chain before and don't know how they work, you notice it has like a little slot here. Kind of a small slot. That slot is the same diameter as a link in the chain. So when you hook it up, all you do is you drop the link in the chain directly into it, and that locks the pieces together so they won't come apart. It's a very solid connection. There we go. Now that we got the assembly set up, you notice the jack is upside down. So we'll turn it upside right. To use it as a winch, we'll move the easy to move winch lever back up into its winching position or lifting position. And then use it as a high-rise jack. Now, just so you know, this vehicle is both in park and has emergency brake on. So if you see it moving, that means that this winch is actually moving an 8,000-pound Humvee with locked brakes and transmission across the ground. I won't blow the tranny. I think that gives you the idea. This is how you use a high lift jack as a winch. Now, as with any kind of a winch, there are always those cautions. Watch out for snapping cables, watch out for things that might come loose, and get everything you value out of the way. Because if these babies come loose, there's a lot of energy and they can kill you. Or at least they'll make you hurt. When you're setting up your high lift jack to use as a clamp, and there's a lot of different times you might need a clamp, you have to loosen up this little strap at the tip of your jack. It requires a 3/4 inch wrench, like so. You simply rotate the top plate, and it has a couple of little detents in it so it'll keep it in the right spot. Rotate it until it's vertical, like so. And then make sure you tighten it securely. Once it's good and tight, this is one of your clamping faces along with the toe of the jack itself, down in this area here. So this is what you have to use as a clamp. I've gone ahead and cut a 2x4 that'll fit in between the upper face of the jack, which we just rotated, and the normal lifting arm of the jack. And to clamp, you just do about like this. Now, When you're pressing down, you can see that that's already got that pretty tight, but you also probably notice that this little arm at the top is going to tend to turn a little bit. I don't want to get my fingers in here. It's not very strong, but it will clamp pretty good. There we go. But you see how that rotated? It's not a great function, but you can actually make attachments that clamp onto this pretty good. And I've seen people use these things as log splitters and all kinds of other stuff. But for something out there in the woods, at least you have a clamp that'll hold two wieners together. I want to take out a couple of minutes to talk about winches. Now there's three basic types of winches. One is called the power takeoff winch, which comes directly from the motor. One is called the electric winch, which is of course driven by electrical power taken from the engine. And the third is the hydraulic winch, which runs on hydraulic systems taken from your power steering pump. The one I have here is an electric winch, and it's probably the most common type. And I thought we'd take a little bit of a look at it to give you a sense of what a winch does and what the parts are and how to work it. A couple of things about the electric winch. The electric winches pull a lot of juice. This 8,000-pound electric winch here sucks almost 450 amps of juice. Now that's a lot more than the alternator can put out. An average automobile only puts out about 200 amps from the alternator, and the rest of the juice is going to have to come from your battery. What this means to you is that if you're pulling with an electric winch for a long period of time, it won't be long before you suck all the juice out of your battery, and then you're really in trouble. So electric winches are designed to be used in short pulls and not at maximum capacity. You've got to let that alternator recharge the battery between each pull. So you have to pull, wait, and so forth. Now let's take a look at it. Most winches have this little lever here. On one side it says engage and the other side says free spool. What free spool does is it takes it out of gear so you can just pull the cable straight off. If you're looking at winches, be sure it has a free spool position so you can pull it off and not have to activate the winch in order to get the cable to come out. But the standard operating position is engaged. Some have a second switch, which would be high power or high pull and low pull, or high speed and low speed. The low speed, of course, pulls with more energy than the high speed. This part here with the rollers is called a fair lead, and it's a really important part of the winch because it helps to guide the cable onto the drum, which is back here. Now something else about these things, when you're running the winch back in, you've got to be careful that you don't put your hand too close to the fair lead. If you do, it might suck your hand in between these rollers, and that will crush your thumb and your hand and possibly pull your hand in and tear it off. You can easily pull your hand off with the winch. Always use gloves and keep your hand at least a foot away from the fair lead when you're doing the winching, if you've got your hand on the cable at all. The cable itself is controlled by a little switch, and these little switches generally have quite a bit of space on them. In other words, about 15 feet of cord, so you can operate it from within the vehicle itself. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put the hood up when I'm winching. That way if the cable does happen to snap and fly back, the hood will catch it on the underside and protect the windshield from the crashing cable. Whenever you're doing a full pull with your winch, whether it's dragging something or you're trying to pull yourself out of a bog, be sure that the motor is running. If it's not, this winch could pull all the juice out of your battery, and then you won't be able to get your motor started once you're out of the hole. So be sure the engine is running when you use your winch.
Sometimes when you need to use your winch, you're not going to have any place to attach your winch to. You see, you're going to be in sand or mud or someplace like that. Well, if that happens to you, what do? You dig a hole and use something called the dead man technique. No, it doesn't mean you got to kill your buddy. What it means is you got to get your spare tire out and bury it in the ground. And then you're going to attach your winch cable to that buried object. Actually, you attach it before you bury it, and then you go ahead and winch. So we're going to give that a shot right now. Now, this technique is definitely a lot more work than the other one. In order to hook up, you need to take your snatch cable, you pass it through the center of the tire, and then you take your little crowbar and you pass it through the end of the cable and you pull it tight. That locks the cable to the wheel, and then you drop it in the hole. Now that is your dead man. In order to keep it down in the hole, we're going to add a whole bunch of dirt to it. At least that's one way. Another way to do it is if you've got a partner, you could have them stand on one side of it, and that's not always safe. But if you're not pulling too hard, it's probably okay. Still, the safest way really is just to cover it with dirt. Now the pressure of the pull is being taken by the wall dirt that's off to one side in the direction that you're pulling. And you always want to be pulling up a little bit as well as out. Sometimes you get lucky and you'll find a stream bank or something like that in front of you. And you can always toss the dead man over the edge of the stream bank, and that'll help to anchor it. But you got to kind of play around to find some way for this thing to wedge itself in the existing geography. Sometimes you need a little shorter cable. In order to get that shorter cable, you need to put a little knot in it, something like this. Now if I just go ahead and put a knot in it and then put a lot of pressure on here, why, this knot's going to tighten up so much I'll probably never get it done or undone. In order to beat that, take a piece of wood that you think you can break and stick it into the knot like so. That way when it tightens up, it'll tighten up on the piece of wood. Then you snap the wood when you're done and the knot's loose and you can untie it pretty easily. So let's go ahead and hook this up to the winch now. That always happens. There we go. If you're using the bank to support the dead man, what you need to do is cut into it a little bit so the face of the bank holds the tire. Make a little cut. This is going to hold the table. When you use this technique, it's a good idea to be in the car, or at least have somebody in there, and then operate the winch from within the vehicle at the same time that you step on the gas. That gives you help from your vehicle while you get out, as well as the draw from the winch itself. So I'm going to pop over there, get in the vehicle, give it a little bit of gas, and hit that winch. Remember that knot? This cable got pretty tight around this piece of wood. And if that had been a knot, I probably wouldn't have been able to get it out. So what we're going to do is try to break this wood here. Got pretty tight around that. And there you go. Back to a regular piece of cable, just because of a piece of wood. Cool. Another way to do the dead man is to use a piece of wood or a log in a hole like this. Now you could either bury the thing, or you could do what I'm doing here, which is make a little notch to hold the dead man. So when you're drawing back with your winch, it's actually pulling this piece of wood into the face of the dirt. Now this is a real easy way to do it. It of course saves you from having to take that spare tire out from under your car or wherever it happens to be stored. And of course you won't damage the tire either. So this is a good one, and it's good up to maybe a few thousand pounds of pulling. But remember, the wood could break, and if it does break, it's going to bring these pieces right back at you, and that could cause some problems. So be careful with this, but it is a good alternative. Well, we're out here in the middle of the desert. We drove about 45 miles down a dirt road so we could film desert survival. And of course our notion is that it's always the vehicle that gets you into trouble. Guess what? We got a flat tire. Now normally a flat tire is not a big deal, except on these modern cars they put that spare tire up underneath the chassis. That means that you get this little crank out and you lower it down so you get at the spare tire. Unfortunately, the crank was misaligned, so we couldn't lower the spare tire. Now, if you didn't use a little innovation, we'd be stuck here. But we're not. We got out a crowbar, and with the crowbar, ripped out all the little guide tubes that led back to that fancy little crank. And all these pieces came off. And once they were off, I was able to get in, line up with the crank, and start lowering that tire. So what we're going to do now is lower the tire and put on our spare and turn around and go home, because now we don't have a spare. I love this stuff. Now it's time for the high lift jack. Before you start jacking, you want to put a rock under the wheel so it won't roll. The emergency brake won't work if the wheels are off the ground. Then it'll roll and smash you to death.
Ho, 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 another bottle of rum.
In case you've never changed a tire before, it's a good idea to loosen up the lug nuts before you get the tire completely off the ground. Otherwise it'll want to spin. Some of the newer cars have weird stuff like this is a screw-on cover for the lug nuts. So I had to get the screw-on cover off first, and now I can get at the lug nuts, and that's these puppies down here. I'm just going to loosen them. I'm not going to actually take them off yet. I'll do that when I'm ready to change the tire. That's so that if the jack pops, it won't land on the axle. It will just land on the tire, and the tire will be loose, but it'll still be on there. There we go. Okay. See, using the that carpet to keep the parts clean while I take it apart. Now we'll get it up the rest of the way. What you got in the air, you can go ahead and take the nuts off. What I do is make sure that the spare tire is ready to roll right on, and kind of leave one nut on there fairly tight up until the last minute. As soon as you get the tire back on, go ahead and put a couple of nuts on. Don't bother tightening them up yet. Just get a couple of them on there so the wheel's on there again in case that jack goes out. That way you got it, at least you got a wheel on it. First thing you do after you get the lug nuts all in place is go through and just give them a little bit of a cinch. That way the bevel part of the nut will stick down inside of the wheel itself and keep it in place. Now some people like to tighten these in a certain pattern, one side to the other side, do like a star pattern like that. That kind of spreads out the torque. That's the way I usually do it. I just tighten it on until I hear it squeak. Or until a bar breaks. There we go. And she's on. Then it's time to put this piece of junk back in place. Now it doesn't look like it's really going to go on there. It's not the same kind of rim. So I guess it's not time to put this piece of junk back in. I'll just put that in with a spare tire. Now it's time to let that baby back down and see if it holds up. Woo. Now, got a couple more things to show you. Let's put this puppy back. This here is the reason the tire went flat. See how it's all slid up right there? That's because when you're driving in the desert, a lot of times there's sharp rocks. And those rocks are like pieces of glass and they're hard. They'll drive right through a tire like this, and they'll puncture the bottom of the tire or the sidewalls up in here. Now, some people think of these little air compressors as a security blanket. If they get a flat, they just hook one of these babies on. Well, unfortunately, in a situation like this, I've got a real tear in the bottom of the tire. If it was in the sidewall, it would be even worse, so they're really hard to patch. There are ways to patch them, and we'll get around to that later on. But if I tried to put air into this tire, it's not going to hold the air for very long. Another thing is that because this is a tubeless tire, a lot of times the tube will come right off the rim. So you've got a big, huge gap there, and there's no way a little air compressor like this can reseat what's called the bead. That's the rubber part where it hooks onto the side of the rim. So you got to have some way of reseating the rim with a device. If you really want to use a little tire like a little compressor like this to blow it back up again after you patch the leak. We're going to get into that in a few minutes, but what you got to do with the tubeless tire is you got to patch the inside. There's some ways to do that. One is you could push something into the inside from the outside, or you could take the rim off completely, reach up in there and put a patch in place. Some people go ahead and stick a tube in a tubeless tire as an emergency repair, so they carry along a tube as well. That's not real good because tubeless tires get really hot, and the pressure, the friction between the tube and the inner tube and the tire itself is going to be such that it could explode the tire right on your car, and you could really have yourself a thrill. Another way to take a flat tire like this, once it's come off the rim, is to fill it with things like brush. You could just gather a bunch of pine needles if you're in a pine needle area, or sagebrush, but pack it as full of stuff as you possibly can. And sometimes you can get enough stuff inside that tire to actually drive out on a flat tire, even if you can't patch it or if you don't have another spare. Now, the last thing, when you get done taking off your spare, the natural thing is to go ahead and put it back where you took your spare off of originally. In other words, crank it back up in this car, back up underneath. But if I do that, chances are I'll forget that I've got a flat. If I stick this baby right up there in the back of the truck, it's going to be sitting in there, and it's going to be a constant reminder that that tire needs to be replaced. So I suggest that you put it out someplace where it gets in your way. Put it on the passenger side. But that will make sure that you'll get that tire fixed, so you'll always have that spare waiting for you. Well, since we're in a situation, I thought it might be a good time to go ahead and talk about some of the stuff you ought to have with you in your car in case there's an emergency like this one. Let me start with this little battery here. This little battery is like a jumper battery. It actually has about 850 amps of cranking power. So if the battery were to go dead while I was back in the woods or in the desert, I'd at least have this power supply. I can always use this as well to power other 12-volt things. It's got a little 12-volt plug right here, and I can plug in pumps and lights and things of that sort. And this just recharges right out of the cigarette lighter in the vehicle. Just hooks right up and it stays charged all the time. But it's really handy to have one of these things, and that way you always know you can get your vehicle started or do signaling with lights using this. Another thing I carry with me is a little electric air compressor like this one here. These things just plug into a 12-volt supply like the battery I just showed you. And while they don't put out a whole lot of air, they will eventually inflate a tire. That is, if that tire isn't leaking more than this thing can pump in. And a lot of times they will leak more than that, but at least the air coming out of this will help you to find out where that leak is and hopefully repair the tire. Because once you're down to 0 spares, the next time you get a flat, you're in trouble. So you got to keep that car on the road by keeping those tires round. Now I also carry with me a couple of cans of this Fix-A-Flat stuff. There's lots of different kinds of it, but basically this stuff has air in it and a sealant. Now if you just get a nail or something like that in your tire, a real slow leak, leave the nail in and go ahead and fill it back up. This will help inflate the tire and put some crap around the outside of that leak and help to stop the thing from leaking. But with a big leak, it doesn't do anything but spray fluid all around. They're really not very effective if you got a bad leak or a bad puncture. For that, you need something more dramatic. And by more dramatic, I mean a little tire repair kit. And I'll show you more about the contents of that in a minute. But what I want to do first is find out if that tire can be inflated with this little guy here and see if we can locate the actual leak, and then we'll decide how we're going to repair that leak. Well, I had the pump on for a little while, and the tire didn't seem to get a whole lot fatter. So in order to find that leak, I'm going to go ahead and do it backwards. I'm going to put some of this puncture seal into the tire, and if there's a big leak, we'll find out immediately where the leak is, because this stuff will spurt on through, and then we'll attempt to repair it. Now keep in mind that that this stuff doesn't work very well in very low temperatures, so if you're out in freezing temperatures, it's not going to be a good thing. Generally, to do this, what you want to do is shake the can up real well, like this. Incidentally, this is usually done on the tire, or sorry, on the car. What happens is you put this stuff in, and then you drive very slowly, and it smears around the inside of the tire and repairs it. This will not fix a sidewall rupture or anything of that sort. It just fixes holes in the tread. So let's go ahead and stick this on. When you do this, the hole should be at the bottom, or the filler should be at the bottom, and you just press down on it, and then the slime squirts out, and it starts to fill the tire up with the sealant stuff. After a short while, it'll stop leaking on my finger. Gag. This is one reason I don't like this stuff. They don't last a long time. Well, I just dumped an entire can of flat fix into this thing, and we'll see what happens here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's still flat. You see, if I was depending on flat fix to get me out of this situation, I'd be in some kind of trouble by now. But maybe with that flat fix in there, we can find out where the leak is. So what I'll do is start spinning the tire around. Right now it's full of flammable liquid, by the way. You know, if I take this into a shop to have them repair it, I got to tell the guy, I use flat fix on this tire. Otherwise he may open it up and blow his face off. This stuff is highly flammable. Nope, here it is, right there. Remember, see there? Look at that leak. So now we know that we've got a gape in the tire. I'll use a screwdriver here. That's our hole. Well, those are tough to fix. Now, ordinarily, if I wanted to actually patch this tire, I'd go inside the tire. But if I go inside the tire, that means I'm going to have to take it off the rim, and that's a real chore. Not only getting it off, but getting it back on. We'll take a look at the getting it off and getting it back on stuff in a little bit. Now let's take a look at my patch kit. I keep everything together in a little box. You can put it in a bag or whatever, and I'll just show you what's in here. Parachute cord. I've got, these are kind of like, they're called volcanic patches. And actually you ignite these things and they burn their way onto the tire. It's an old style patch, but these work really well inside the tire. I'll show you how to use these in a little bit. For this kind of a slash though, normally what you do is you'd use a tire patch kit like this. This is like a needle, and these are little patches, and these will be shoved down inside, and then they've got goo on them, and those will seal themselves in that crack, but that's a pretty big crack. I also carry with me some rubber cement. This is actually called a universal cement, and I use this for larger holes. Let me first show you though, if I was patching a regular hole, what I would do with the tire plunger jobby. You can see these gooey little patches here. Ugh, nasty. See, they went and got hot. Okay, these are your patches. The way they work is this, if I can get that off my hand. You grab well, I'm going to grab a couple of these sticky puppies. There we go. And then I'm going to stick them through the, if I can get them in there, the eye on this tool. Nasty. Like so. Now don't expect too much from this patch, because this is a monster hole. Well, there you go. I've gone and stuck 2 of those into the sticker inner tool here, and usually you just use 1 of these, but since I've got a pretty good sized gash, I'm going to use 2. You can use 3 if you can get them in there, but that's the patch kit. Now here's how you use it. Just so you know, this is all wet now from that nasty stuff I stuck in there, that filler. But you shove, see how this is going in? You shove the patch down into the tire, like so, and then you pull it back out like this until she's out about, oh, 1/4 of an inch or so. After you've done that, you just cut the GUI together, and there's your patch. Now what we'll do is we'll kind of use the tip of the tool to push her around in there a little bit. And this stuff sort of welds itself to the rubber in a little while. Like I say, it would work a lot better on a smaller hole, but at least that's how that would work. Ordinarily, we let that dry for, or set up for, oh, half an hour or so, then put pressure in it with the little air pump, and hopefully it'll hold some air. Now, because we're not going to rely on this one to find out if it works, I want to show you another technique. I'm just going to go ahead and pull it out. Right. And show you if I can get it out. Ugh. There we go. Boy. Well, that's the patch. Let me show you another way to do it if you don't have one of those kits. For the next technique, all we need is some parachute cord, some rubber cement, and a screwdriver. It's pretty similar to what I just showed you. It's a lot sloppier though. What we do is we take the parachute cord inner core lines out, like so. I'll just lay them on the tire here so you can see them. And get this out of the way here. Remember, our little patch is right where we're going to put our patch is right in there. What I'm going to do now is put some rubber cement, whoa, right into the hole. Kind of get that ready. Woo! Pretty liberal with it there. And then we'll take all this other gooey stuff here and put a good load onto the parachute cord. After the parachute cord's good and messy, that's what I mean by messy. I'll take this, pick it up with a screwdriver. My fingers will probably stick to my nose if I try to pick it. Let's see here, where's the hole? There it is, that's not too hard to find. Now I'll take the screwdriver, start shoving this stuff down in there. Now remember, this is all coated with that nasty rubber cement, and I'll add a little bit more to it. Just so you know, rubber cement, this type here, takes about an hour to cure. So you're going to need to let this sit for an hour before you try to put any pressure on it. By the way, if you do get air in a tire that's repaired like this, this is not a highway tire. This is a get you back to a good road and call for help kind of a tire. There we go. And that's pretty much it. Just leave it sticking out. It's easier for the guy to get a good laugh at you when he goes to repair your tire or replace it. So I'm just going to let that sit for a little while, and then we'll see if we can put some air in it. But this is a good field expedient way to do it. It just requires a parachute cord, a screwdriver, and rubber cement. This RTV silicone auto sealant is real good. This is a general purpose waterproof RTV silicone glue. And this stuff here works real well as well. You just cut that tip off and squirt some of that in. It's a lot thicker than the rubber cement, and it's pretty durable. This might even actually fill the hole by itself. But this is a good thing, and it can be used on a lot of different places on your vehicle for patching holes. Well, I guess the shadows are starting to get a little long now, and this has only been sitting here for about a half an hour. It's probably not sealed, but I don't really care because I know that this patch here would take a little bit more effort than we put into it. We're going to go ahead and put air in it, but As I said, we don't care. We do have the spare on, and what we're going to do is toss this in the back and drive on home. So let's put some air in it and see if it'll hold anything at all. Well, it fixed it. At least it's patched for now. I know that if I start to drive on it, it's probably going to change the geometry of the tire again after a little while. But I do have a repair in there. Now, ordinarily, once you start driving on a repair like this, the centrifugal force is going to drive all of that juice and other stuff up into this hole, and that'll add to the material that's going to be plugging up the hole. All that hair, you know, from the parachute cord is going to be on the inside there, and that'll kind of clump up and it'll glue itself to it. So the first couple of miles on a patch like this, you want to drive real slowly. But at least now I have another spare. I'm not going to trust it for anything dramatic, but at least I have a spare, and if I really needed to, I could drive out. There's a good reason for talking about flat repair like this. See, in the majority of cases where people are stuck out in the wilderness, it's not really the result of mechanical breakdown. It's a result of a flat tire, actually. A flat tire or a blowout or something like that. So our goal here is to teach you enough about your tires so that you can actually repair one in the field if you need to, and then you could drive out of your situation. But tire repair is an essential part of actually any vehicle owner's repertoire of skills. Now, you may have noticed while I've been working on these tires that I've always worn glasses. There's a good reason for that. Whenever you're working around a tire, be sure to wear glasses. Remember, these things are filled with compressed air, and that compressed air could, it could express itself forcibly, kind of like a cannon, and blow rocks and dirt and sand right into your eyes. So glasses are essential whenever you're working with tires. Earlier I showed you my little patch kit, and in the patch kit I identified something called a volcanic patch. And this is it here. I told you that I'd be showing you how these work, and so now I'm going to do that. There are two sides to the volcanic patch. There's the volcanic side, that's this cardboard looking side, and then the patch itself. Now these are available in a lot of different sizes, and clearly these would go on the inside of the tire because you're going to want the pressure from the inside of the tire pressing these into the hole. But I'm just going to go ahead and apply it to the outside of our test tire here. In order to do that, all you need to do is scrape the area you're going to apply the patch to. In other words, you want it to be fairly clean and dry. And you could do that with a knife or a piece of sandpaper or just about anything, but try to roughen it up a little bit like so. Now you place the patch there. But before you do it, on the patch side you'll see there's a little sheet of stuff, and you peel that off, and that's your actual patch. So you place that over the hole that you want to take care of. The next thing you're going to want to do is dig into it a little bit and raise some of this stuff up so you can ignite it. After that, you'll need something to hold it down. Ordinarily, they make a little device that holds this stuff down, but you'll see here in a minute. I'm just going to use my flint and steel to light this off. It gets good and hot. What it's actually doing is melting that little rubber patch right into the tire itself. So now it has to sit for a few seconds until that fuzzy stuff all burns off. Now you can see I just used a piece of wood to hold it down. And that's plenty, just as long as you've got lots of pressure on it. Remember, this is supposed to be on the inside of the tire. Now what I'm going to do is take this stick off, if I can, without disturbing the patch too much. There we go. And let that cool. After it cools a little bit, I'll be able to peel this off, and we should see a nice patch underneath it. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this. It's cooled off a little bit. It'll still be pretty hot, but I'll just grab it with my little tool here and kind of peel it off like so. And there you have it. You can see it's melted fresh rubber right onto the area where on the inside of the tire there would be a hole. Well, I guess it's time to take our test tire and pretend like we're a piece of glass on the road. I've got my tactical letter opener here. Well, it's leaking. Try it again. Tires are pretty tough. There we go. Whenever you're getting ready to patch a tire, you want to make sure that if you know where the hole is, you identify it by marking it with a magic marker or a piece of chalk. What I usually do is I draw a line down the sidewall and hook it up with the rim as well. That way when I put the tire back on the rim, if I have to do that, why, I can line the pieces up and the tire will still be reasonably well balanced. What I want to do now is break the bead on this. In other words, I want to separate the tire from the rim, and I want you to see how seating a rim or seating the bead might be done in the field. I'm going to use the high lift jack to help me remove this tire from the rim. There we go. Sometimes a bead doesn't want to come loose, so if you add a little water to it, or better yet water with some soap in it, that'll help it to break its bonds with the metal. Something else to keep in mind, when this tire finally does let go, it's going to go probably pretty violently. So you've got to be sure that you're out of the way of anything that might be flying. Now you might have noticed, of course, that we've put our tailgate up. Woo! Woo! Now the bead down in here on the tire is off the rim. So what I'm going to do is work my way around and take the bead completely off the rim so I can show you some more tricks. Woo! The reason I went through all the trouble of breaking the bead was so I could take out a few minutes to show you how to set the bead. In other words, sometimes when you get a flat tire, your tire is going to go so flat that the tire will actually come off the rim, and you'll be out there with a floppy rim and a loose tire. Well, if you want to fix that tire, there's a way to get that to go back on, but one of those little air pumps isn't going to do the job. The first thing you've got to do to reseat a bead on a tubeless tire is you need to get all of the rubber in contact with the steel rim. Now I'll show you a couple of ways to do that. Basically, when you're trying to reseat a bead on a steel rim like this, what you want to do is expand the sidewall so they'll pop up over the steel on the rim. Now one way to do that is with a strap like this. This is just one of those little tension straps, and it's used for holding loads down. Let me show you how to try to tighten up one of these tires with one of these straps. All you need to do is wrap the strap clear around the tire and back into the little tensioner here, and then start cranking on it. As you crank on it like this, it pulls the tire down into the wheel, and at the same time it pushes the sidewalls up onto the steel. That's a good idea to lubricate in here with soap or water, or even if you've got it, oil. You could pour some of that in there, but something to lubricate it so it'll slide on. With a smaller tire like this, give it a few cranks. After you get it on a little ways, you could then start putting air in it, and it should be tight enough that the air that you put in there is going to pop that bead back up onto the rim, and you're all set to go again. But this is a quick and easy way of doing it if you happen to have one of these with you. Now there's another technique that's a little bit more dramatic. Let me show you that one. Now this next technique is pretty dangerous, and you really wouldn't use it on a smaller tire like this unless you absolutely had to. In fact, this is one of those techniques you only use if you really have to. You don't want to go out and practice this thing because, as I say, it is dangerous. But it involves starting fluid, strike anywhere matches, and a rug. Now a quick thing about starting fluid. Starting fluid is really handy to have with you in your car. If you've got just a little bit of battery powered left and you're afraid you can't get the car started, quick squirt of this in your carburetor and hit that ignition and boom, the engine will start right up. This is really good stuff. It's made out of ethyl ether, just so you know. So it's just ether, and it's very volatile, all the way down to about 60 below zero. So on a very cold day, you can get your engine started if you've got this stuff. But how do you use it in here? What I'm going to do is I'm going to spray a small amount of it inside the tire. Then I'm going to toss a match at it and get the heck out of the way. Hopefully what will happen is it'll ignite the gas inside and that'll blow the tire right up onto the rim. Let's give it a shot. Well, there you have it. You saw how the ether did the job. Now, you might have noticed what I did is I covered it up with the carpet first. The reason for that was I didn't want that valve stem to come winging out of there like a bullet and slug me in the mug. So I covered it up with a blanket, or actually with a piece of carpet. And a blanket would be just fine too. Just something to keep it from turning into ballistic things and blowing your face off. The next thing I had to do was spray a little bit of this stuff around the outside and then step on it a little bit so the material would sink down into the cavity on the interior of the tire. Then I lit it on fire. Once it was on fire, well, that fire was burning like a fuse, and all I had to do at that point was to step on the outside of the tire. And what that did is it let a lot more air into the interior of the tire, and that's when it went off. Now, this wasn't a huge boom, but it was enough of an explosion to push that rubber back up onto the steel and seat the bead. So it was a good, easy way to do it. Now, there's other ways to do it. You could use, God forbid, gasoline and propane. Now, I would never recommend that you do that kind of thing, but I've heard of people using propane and gasoline. In my mind, that's suicidal. This is about as far along the list of explosives as I'm likely to go when it comes to seating a tire. And since I have it with me anyway, this is my choice. But there you go. There's a couple of ways to get that tire back up onto the rim. One of the things I like about my job is I get to play with big knives. And not just play with them. I get to test them. Now, how do I test one of these blades? Well, I don't test it like some people. I don't shove these things into a crack in a cliff face and then drop a car on it. You see, I haven't dropped a car on a knife in a lot of years. But what I do is something I think of as a real-world test, and that is quartering a frozen elk. When you're quartering a frozen elk, you're going to end up with 4 frozen elk legs. And these babies are what really tests a blade. Over the years, I've used a frozen elk bone test on a lot of knives. Some of them have just shattered. Some of them have bent. Some of them have deformed. But the test of a real knife is, after you get done chopping up a frozen elk bone leg like this one, it's still a good blade. So let's get to work and test a couple of blades on the frozen elk bone. The 3 blades I'm going to take a look at here are a Trace Rinaldi Armageddon, which you've already seen in our volume 11, a Trace Rinaldi Machete, this is a new knife that Trace is making, and a Bill Siegel blade, custom blade that he made for me. Now, these 2 blades, the Siegel blade and the arm, the Armageddon here, are both roughly 10-inch blades. This is 10.5 and this is 10 inches. The larger Machete here is running about a 12.25-inch blade, so it's got a lot of whacking power. Now, the Armageddon has been around a lot. I've used this a lot, and you'll see the Armageddon and the Machete both have stains on the blade. These stains are the result of having whacked into animal flesh, and actually what they are is they're blood spots. See, blood has a lot of oxygen in it. The hemoglobin in the blood transports oxygen, and if you don't get the blood directly off of a bare blade like this, it doesn't take long for it to start to stain the blade and create these little changes in here. It's not really rust, they're not pitted, they're just discolorations caused by blood. So whenever you're using a satin blade like this, you need to clean it right away. The Siegel blade here is actually sandblasted or bead blasted, so it won't show very much after it's been used for a while. But these are the 3 blades I'm going to work with. I'm going to start out with a Bill Siegel blade. Now this big baby here weighs about 25 ounces. It's got a 10.5-inch blade. It's made out of 5160 steel, 1/4 of an inch thick. Now 5160, if you don't know it, is actually like truck spring steel. It's real resilient, takes a lot of shock, and it holds a darn good edge. It's not a stainless, it's a high carbon steel. So let's put this one to the elk bone right now. Well, I just chopped this leg all the way down to this little stump here at the hoof end, and the blade actually shows almost no, well, actually shows no deformation or change or anything. So it successfully destroyed a frozen elk bone, and that's pretty amazing performance for any blade. So now let's move on and test a couple of other blades on another elk leg. The next blade is going to be the Trace Rinaldi machete. Now this big baby here has a 12.25 inch length blade. It weighs about 19 ounces. It's made out of A2 steel, which is a darn good steel, one of my favorites. This is only a 3/16 inch thick blade, so it's a little bit thinner than the other ones, but that means that you could whip it pretty fast. So let's give this a shot with the frozen elk bone. There we go. Let's check this one out. Well, the A2 blade did superbly. As usual, the Trace Rinaldi blade slid right through the bone, no problems. Now A2 is a good hard steel, and this one here didn't even deform. It's smooth all the way down the length, just about like it was when I started. And it still has roughly the same kind of edge. So A2 held up very, very well. Well, this old Armageddon's already been through this test, but we're going to do it again. This is also a Trace Rinaldi blade, and it's about a 10-inch blade, and the thing weighs 22 ounces. So I'm going to give this a slam end there. By the way, it's made out of A2 steel, and it's a 1/4 inch thick, so it's got a lot of power. Not as much speed as that longer machete, but it's got a lot of power and a lot of weight. So let's try it. Wow. Well, it looks to me like this blade held up just about like the machete did. There's no deformation in here. There might be a little bit of dullness right where it hit, but fact is that it didn't really show any kind of a change at all. The A2 held up great, and Trace Rinaldi pulls off another one with his Paul Boss tempered A2 steel. Now I want to show you a few things that you ought to keep in your vehicle at all times. You should always keep a flashlight in easy reach. Not only do they give you light, but they make a great self-defense weapon. Another thing you ought to have is a fire extinguisher, and you ought to keep that thing on the driver's side and out in plain sight so you could get to it in case you've got an emergency. In a similar way, you should keep your first aid kit in a place where you get to it quickly. So what's in this kit? Well, let's start with the basics. One thing you should always have with you is a set of maps for the area that you're going to be in or that you're in anyway. This way you could navigate out of trouble. I keep a can of fresh peanuts in here just in case I want to munch on the road. You need some gloves. Look at that. Got another light. This is kind of cool. It runs for about 6 hours on a set of D batteries, and of course it doesn't put out any heat, and it's not dangerous if you tip it over. These are cool. Sanitizer wipes, just in case you need to sanitize. These babies are handy. Everything is handy. Look, I even have some matches. Something else. This is a mini survival kit made just for the car. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here, and I'm not going to go through it all, but you can trust me. It has a little tent in it, and it has some foil and food and odds and ends like that. But that's not all. Insect repellent. If you get out of your car to work on it, the insects are bugging you, they'll stop when you got this stuff. I keep a sleeping bag in here for those cold nights out on the trail when the car's broken down. Here's a quickie for you. This is an emergency ration kit and water. You can pick these up at a lot of different stores, Walmart and so forth. It's just a little emergency 3-day pack. It's got food and water for 3 days in there. Now, it's not a lot of water, but it's enough. Well, kind of. That wasn't enough food for me, because I eat a lot. So I keep 3 MREs in here. Yeah, now I can eat. This little bag here is clothing. Since I usually travel with Karen, why I've got 2 jackets, 2 windbreakers, a little blanket, and odds and ends like that. But this is like a little clothing bag, and if I have to leave the vehicle, this will go with me, and of course all the other stuff will fit in here so I can travel with the bag. Paper towels in case I have to work on the car and my hands get dirty. Jumper cables in case I need a jumper someone else does. There it is. No one can live without duct tape. Or toilet paper. After you get done with the toilet paper, you may need some baby wipes. These are really good. Rags. Rags. Lots of rags. I enjoy rags. I hate sleeping on the ground, so I always put in a little air mattress here so I can lay down. This keeps me up off the ground, keeps me comfortable and warm. 2 books. One on edible plants, one on survival. Pick your own. This is a road flare kit. Basically what's got is road flares and signals and so forth, and so if my car breaks down on the road, I rip it out, stick these up, and hopefully someone won't drive over me, because that's bad for survival. Well, that's it. Well, now you've been messing around with your car and trying to get that baby going, but you can't get it started, or the tire's flat, or the A-arm's bent, or something's wrong and you're stuck. Now what do you do? Well, actually what you need to do now is consider staying with your vehicle and signaling. You need to do something to attract attention to yourself. Now, by not attracting attention, you might kill yourself. Let me tell you a story. Several years ago there was a Baja race. It was a motorcycle race. And one of the guys, well, he got off course a little bit and he headed out into the desert. He realized that he was lost, but he didn't want to be rescued. So he stashed his motorcycle up underneath some kind of a bush and took off across the desert on his own. Now, he didn't have any water or supplies or anything else. He just wanted to rescue himself. He wanted to avoid getting picked up. About 3 days later they found him, but he was dead. About the same time they found his motorcycle hidden. You see, he wouldn't have been dead if he'd had that motorcycle out in the open and he'd used some of the things that are on that bike to attract attention to himself. Oh, sure, he would have taken a ribbing from his buddies, but he would have been alive to take the ribbon. When you're getting ready to signal, the mirror is probably the most traditional way to do it. They're bright, they have a lot of range, and they really attract attention. And on your vehicle there are quite a few sources for mirrors. Now, I usually carry one with me anyway. This is on my compass here, and it works pretty good as a signaling mirror, but it's not as good as the one you'll find on your car. Now, there's a lot of mirrors on an automobile. You got a couple of these outboard babies right here. But sometimes these aren't so good. If you see that little writing down there that objects may be closer than they seem or farther than they seem or whatever it says, that means I just inhaled a mosquito. Anyway, that means that it's going to be distorting the light. It's not going to be focusing it or sending it straight out as a beam. You want a nice flat mirror. Now, one of the sources for that mirror is going to be inside, and that's the center rear view mirror. One of the reasons I like the center rear view mirror is, well, it's a fairly large mirror and it's easy to get off. On most vehicles, it's just a little screw that you take off, and then the thing just slides up off a post that's glued directly to the windshield. So it does come right out. Now if you need to, you can break it off the windshield. Just grab the post at the top and peel out, and it should snap that little post off because it's just glued on the glass. If you break the window, it's just a window, you can get a new one. Remember that insurance company. But this is the easiest one to get to, and this one does give a good signal. Another handy mirror you might have in your car if you've got a CD player is a CD. These little babies here are very good mirrors, and if you want to, you could string them together on a piece of cord, something like this, and then as the light hits them, why, they'll reflect into different places. You could adjust the angle by just tying them off a little differently. At any rate, this thing would just sit out there and the wind would blow it and it'll reflect light. So wherever the light's coming from is going to be shooting light somewhere else. Handy little thing, reflector tree. Now let's find out about aiming the mirror. If you're trying to hit a target, let's say it's somebody on another ridge line, and you want to flash that light on them, it doesn't take much to miss. So you need to find some way to aim the mirror or aim the light. One of the ways to do that is to use your thumb. You put your thumb up in line with your target, and then when the light hits your thumb and it's in line with the target, you're actually getting over there. Now you don't have to worry about moving the light around or moving the mirror around, because it's going to be enough twitch in your hand that it's going to be vibrating wherever it is, and you'll be all over the area. So they're going to see a flashing light out there somewhere, even though you're trying to hold it stable. Another way to do it is to make a V sign with your hand. You aim across the top of the mirror and shine the light on the V so that you can see your target between the V and the light hitting your fingers. And then you're lined up. Of course, at night you're not going to be able to use that signal mirror very well unless it's extremely full moon. So what you've got instead is this. On your vehicle you have turn signals, and you can turn those babies on. You can actually pull them out of the fender, turn them on, and point them up at the sky. So you've got something down there that's flashing. Remember that you've got emergency flashers, and if you just turn those on at night, they're going to throw out a big old spray of light that's going to be visible for many, many miles. Another thing you've got is headlights. Headlights could be dismounted and pulled out of the hood and pointed up at the sky. And you could unplug and plug these things to signal aircraft in the sky or anything else. And remember that the emergency signal is always 3 of anything. 3 dits, 3 DAs, and 3 dits is SOS. So 3 of anything is a good signal. But these are right there on your car and run off the battery, which means you ought to start that car every once in a while to make sure the battery stays charged. Another way to attract attention is to start a signal fire. Now the traditional way to do that is like this. During the daytime you make a smoky fire. That's going to throw plumes of smoke into the air and it's pretty easy to spot. And at night you make a really bright fire, one that's going to attract the eye from a distance. Now when you do it, you usually arrange these things in groups of 3. So the way I usually recommend is that you have one main signal fire, another one a little ways away, and a third one, sort of like a triangle. And from just about any direction you're going to see 3 plumes of smoke or 3 bright fires. But that's the easiest way to do it. Now do I recommend signal fires? Not really. They can get you rescued or they could get you killed. Several years ago a guy was up in the Los Padres National Forest. His bike broke down and he got off and he started a signal fire. Well, it was a good signal fire and it attracted a lot of attention. In fact, they came in there and they put that fire out and he was right in the middle of it, burned to death. So that really didn't do him much good. And then this year a woman was up in the mountains in Arizona and she started a signal fire because she was lost and it got out of control and ended up burning tens of thousands of acres. Fortunately for her, a news helicopter was in the area and was able to pull her out before she burned up as well. The fact is that fires are dangerous to use as a signaling medium. But if you do decide to use one, just be very, very careful with where that fire is placed and make sure that you're not going to start the forest on fire. Now, how do you make a smoky fire? There are a lot of ways to do that. You could use the oil from your crankcase, or if you brought some oil with you, you could use that. You could take the rubber out of the padding in your seat and you could burn that. You could even take a spare tire or a bad tire and burn that. That'll give you lots of black smoke that's going to rise up into the sky and attract a lot of attention. But remember, 3 smoky fires during the daytime and 3 bright fires at night are what you need. So keep that in mind when you start the fire, and watch out, because you sure don't want to be burned up in your signal. One of the reasons people get stuck in the woods is because they have a leak in their cooling system. Sometimes it's a result of a hole in the radiator or one of the freeze plugs, which is a little plug on the side of the block, or other places like that. Now, in order to repair that, I usually keep some of this kind of a stop leak, radiator stop leak, in my vehicle kit. There's a lot of different kinds of this, but this is actually a liquid. I've tried the powders before, and the powders tend to just clump up and not rotate through the system. Consequently, they don't seal the leak well. But the liquid stop leaks tend to work pretty well for me. So I like this. What if you don't have it? In that case, you could go out and look for a piece of cactus. Paddle-tail cactus, if you crush it up, makes an excellent lock stop. What if you don't have a stop leak with you? Well, there are some field expedient repairs for that. One is the cactus. If you have paddle-tail cactus or any other type of cactus for that matter, take some of it and mash it up into a gooey mass, and then put that into your radiator. It'll circulate through the radiator system and eventually find all the holes and plug them. It works pretty well. I actually drove on a car that was plugged that way for almost a year. So there are ways, there are materials you can add to your radiator that'll help plug it up, but I wouldn't add a whole lot. And remember, if you do put a bunch of this stuff in there, eventually you're going to have to take it out. You know, if you're out in the desert and you find out that your radiator has a gigantic hole in it, you can't fix it. What you can do is connect the pipes together, the hoses that go into the top and bottom of the radiator, so it bypasses the radiator altogether. Now, if you do that, you still have a radiator left, and it's called a heater. What you need to do is introduce some liquid into the system. Of course, wait till the motor cools off. Put the liquid in, seal up the system, poking those 2 pipes together, turn on your heater, not your air conditioner, but your heater as high as you possibly can, and drive. Now, I know that's not good for your engine, but if it's a matter of life and death, it's death for the motor as far as I'm concerned. So you drive until the engine gets way hot, stop, let it cool off. Drive, stop, let it cool off, and so forth. But I'll bet you'll be able to get 3 or 4 or 5 miles between each one of those stops, and it's a lot better than trying to walk out in the middle of a 110-degree day in the desert. What if you get a hole in your radiator hose? How do you repair that? Well, the first thing you do is you try to remove it from the car if possible. If it's an upper radiator hose, that's pretty easy. The next thing that you need is you need your knife and your duct tape. Now, some people just go ahead and duct tape this thing closed, and that'll work for a little while. But there's another way that sort of simplifies it and makes that patch a little bit more permanent. And what that requires is, first thing you do is you pull off a piece of tape here. This is that bulletproof tape, and you tape it to itself. This is going to be like a little patch. What I'm trying to do is to create a piece of waterproof material that's going to go over the hole. Now, assuming that the hole is in the back of the hose like this, all you would do is lay that right over what you're trying to tape, and of course the duct tape decides to fold in on itself, so I'll prepare it here. After you've covered up the hole, you take your duct tape and you just go ahead and tape your patch directly over the hole with your duct tape, like so. Now make sure you keep this nice and tight, and give it a good few inches around that patch so you got something to seal it. There you go. It'll look like that. So I've got a waterproof patch over the hole, and then I've put on the duct tape. Replace it and drive away. It's probably going to be good for a few miles before it heats up and water leaks out anyway. But it is a good field expedient for fixing a leaky radiator hose or a leaky heater hose in your car, because those two will blow out at the most awkward times in the desert. This line here is called a brake line hose, and there's 4 of these, 1 on each wheel. These things represent one of the areas where you have a lot of breakdowns in the road. If you're driving off-road, sometimes branches will come up and grab this thing and tear it loose. And when that happens, you'll lose your brakes. So that disables the vehicle back there in the backcountry. Let me show you how to fix one. The first thing you want to do is cut the fractured or torn brake line like you see here. And once you've done that, shove a little stick down into it so it's good and tight in there. And then if you have one, put a hose clamp on it. And if you don't have a hose clamp, you could just wrap a piece of wire around it and tighten it up good and tight. But that seals off that one wheel. Now you ought to know that at that point, that wheel will not have any braking. The next thing you need to do is make sure you've got braking on all your wheels. Now, you're going to step on the brakes and you may not have any brakes because all of the fluid might have drained out of that one line that was ruptured earlier. So how do you fix that? Well, of course, you could refill it with brake fluid if you happen to have some. But what if you don't have any brake fluid? There's an easy solution. Use water. Pour water into your braking system and refill it. After you've done that, the water will migrate down to the wheels and that will work pretty well as a hydraulic fluid that was in here. Except one little difference. Water boils at a fairly low temperature, so your brakes will probably heat up pretty quickly, or at least the water in the lines will heat up pretty quickly, and it'll boil, which means you'll lose braking again. But you stop, you let it cool off, and then you start driving again. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for a permanent cure. Of course, when you get back out, what you're going to do is replace the brake line with a new one, and then bleed all the brake lines, and then add new brake fluid. Actually, what you have to do is wash it all the way out. But water is a good substitute for brake fluid if you don't have any more brake fluid. What about some other fluids in that braking system? Well, probably not. Most other fluids are either going to be volatile, which means they'll catch fire, or they're going to tend to break apart the rest of the braking system. In other words, dissolve some of the little delicate rubber valves and so forth that you'll find down in the braking system. Water is your best simple solution for a brake line problem. There's about 100 other little tricks you can use to get your car back on the road. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you get a hole in your gas tank, what do you use to plug the hole? Well, the old standby is a piece of ivory soap. You take some soap and you whittle it into something that looks like a carrot and shove it in the hole. And that should last for a little while. And there's a lot of tricks like that that work pretty well. I'll give you another example. What if you've got a leak in your power steering pump and you got fluid spraying out? Well, put 3 or 4 drops of brake fluid in it. The brake fluid gets in there, cycles around, softens up the seals, and then reseals the thing for a little while anyway. And they go on and on and on, and you've probably heard a dozen of these stories, and they're all good. They're all worth trying. But the important part of it is get the vehicle back on the road and drive out of trouble. If you can do that, you could save yourself from being in a survival situation. Why do people get stuck in the woods? Well, I'll tell you the reason that's most common. High speed. You see, a lot of people get back there in the woods and they think they could just beat that vehicle to death. They see stuff on TV and they roar along the roads like the Baja 500. Well, guess what? The cars that they use in those races are different from the one that you get. And I don't care if yours says SUV on it. It's not designed to be beat up. If you beat it up, you could expect it to break down. So if you want to do that kind of driving, don't do it when you're alone or with just your family. Be sure you do it as a part of an organized group, as some sort of an organized trail event or something like that. And that way, if you have a breakdown, you've got other people around who can help you get back on the road. But be sure that when you're driving off-road or back in the woods someplace, that you take care of that vehicle, because that will get you back out. And if you do break down, you've got a few of the tricks that'll get you back on the road and hopefully get you home. Now you know that we haven't dealt with any of the physiological or psychological effects of survival with your vehicle, because they really don't pertain to this. What we dealt with was just purely the mechanical device, the car. And we're going to be moving away from the car in the next video, and we're going to start talking about some of the physiological, psychological, and tricky, cool Woodsmaster tips that work really well in arid environments or the desert. In the next video, we're going to be on foot in the desert. See ya on the trail.